crossways on it or lengthways?
No, you're gonna lay it crossways. Yep. And fix this here. Always want to be careful with these plastic parts because they have a tendency to snap. So placing the tailbone down as best you can. And in this instance, I would always gauge comfort as to, do you feel comfortable placing your head on the ground? And if not, we would put a block underneath you.
I mean, I'm a little hyperextended in my neck, but not too bad.
You don't want that, because over time, if we're here for about 5 or 6 minutes, you'll definitely feel that afterwards.
Okay.
I'm going to place that back here.
That's fine.
Yeah. So the first thing we want to do is, again, use the roller as a point of reference for your spine. And where you feel the vertebra, I want you to try and reach the vertebra away from that point of contact as best you can. Good. Try not to feel your head pressing into the block to make that happen.
What? Okay.
Yep. And using your imagination, just think about the portion of your chest that is totally opposite of the roller. Think about that portion of your chest as reaching away from the roller as well. Good. If at any point in time you feel your head pressurizing that block, try your best to relax that action.
So you have to be pushing down somewhere to get the lift. So am I pushing down in the outer edges of my ribs to sort of pull this up?
Yeah,
or?
so number one, your tailbone is one point of contact.
Okay.
And your vertebra itself is the other point of contact.
Right.
So your shoulders, in essence, kind of drive back to give it some sort of leveraging.
Okay.
But in essence,
There
I would imagine.
So it's more like widening the collarbones and pressing your tailbone down.
Yeah, so we shouldn't have to widen the collarbones, but initially,
I probably have to.
Yeah, initially I always tell people, try and make your chest proud without actually reaching your ribs, which is a tricky thing to do, right? So if you exhale and feel your rib cage slightly pull down toward your hips, good. Now think of the vertebra that's above the roller versus below the roller versus contact with the roller.
Okay.
Right? So there's a center point, which is the contact. There's an above point, which is free to go with gravity. And there's the below point, which is also free to go with gravity, right? Both of those points are essentially over the edge of the cliff, right?
Right.
So if they weren't attached to your body at all, they would fall to the ground in front of the roller or behind the roller, right? I want you to think about those points trying to go down while the point of contact goes up. Right? And your spine has literally millimeters of motion, so the motion will not be great. But the intent of trying to extend that one portion away starts to create the millimeter of motion. Right? Now, once we're in that position of, I've got as much reach away from this roller as I can get, we're going to make sure we breathe into that position. So this is where the maximal expansive breath is going to come in handy. Good. Try for the 8-second breath in versus the 8-second breath out. So after about 20 breaths, then we're going to go for flexed state, trying to feel that vertebra press into the roller as much as it possibly can without producing as much protraction as you would produce. Keep breathing. This breath is really good for creating those initial small degrees of motion. And every small degree of motion produces a capability to create greater degrees of motion. So anytime you're starting something that feels like, oh, nothing is happening, fix yourself into a position, start that maximal expansive breath, and you've now got a leg up into the next step. Just one more here. Good. I'm going to ask you to place your fingertips right behind your head or behind your ears. Your elbows should peel back gently toward the ground. Good. And now I want you to feel that vertebra pressurizing against the roller. The head is allowed to lift off with the body. Good. Hold that position. And now try and take it in the opposite direction. That vertebra tries to come away from the roller. Imagine that vertebra trying to come through your body toward the ceiling. Good. Watch the rib cage reach. And remember, these are very small degrees, so once you feel like, oh, that's all I can reach, then that's all I got. Give me 3 more. One more here. Good. Gently relax into position.
So much more work like happening here. I can feel like everything's trying to work here and everything's over here is like, wait, what? What are we doing? What are we doing? Yeah.
Well, the good thing is it's doing a good job not to pop as it usually does.
Trying really hard
Yeah.
to like pull it back down.
It's hard work.
It's super stretched too. All that is like pulling. So that's good.
So now we're going to make it just a little bit more challenging in the sense because we're moving down the spine toward the next vertebra.
Okay. So like a little bit, maybe like tips of shoulder blades-ish?
I would say just about an inch away from where you were before. That's good. So the T-spine, I mean, spans from above the shoulder blade all the way to just beneath the shoulder blade. So we just want to be 1 inch down, essentially, because we're asking the next vertebra to do the very same thing.
All right, so same action of kind
Same
of moving
action.
into
I'm actually
and
going
away
to move
from.
this block out since you have your hands there and gently peeling the elbows back.
Okay, so press that vertebra in
Yep.
to the
Yep. And then complete opposite direction.
away from.
Two more. One more. Good. Allow the head to come down. Good. Arms can stay at your sides. Shoulders try to come away from the ceiling toward the roller. You can stay there if you like. Give me some tension at the abdominals so the rib cage is not able to reach freely on its own. And we're going to do 5 big breaths. 8 seconds in. 8 seconds out. 8 seconds in. Good, resting. So with the prop, I mean, we're essentially putting this foundation underneath and kind of forcing, you know, it to move, right? Even if the movement is so minuscule. Our breath then adds a little bit of freedom to the rib cage so that any of the restriction that is between the ribs starts to kind of relieve itself and allow the motion to happen. And gravity also helps with that action. Now, one way that we start to work with the space that we just created is pails and rails, right? So if I'm trying to create pails and rails for extension, you can come out of that position. One way I can do it is by giving myself this marker as to what I'm trying to work, right? So if it's lumbar, it's gonna be down here. With the T-spine, we're working up a little bit higher. And I'm always gonna figure, where am I gonna start on my T-spine? For me, I always like to start at T12, right at the beginning, right? So I'm gonna go into this position here. My forearms are gonna be what's trying to keep me in extension. My hands can be right at my center here so that my hands don't have to do a lot of work and move around. And what I'm trying to do is go with my line and then go, or rather against my line and then with my line. For me personally, this is a game changer because this, I can actually feel gravity helping me to go with the line.
Yeah, for sure.
And then if I lead with my lumbar, I can feel my belly press into the ground, which I don't want, right?
So this is actually a question I had about something else. I can't remember which position, but would it be helpful or not helpful to bolster into a slight post tilt to do something like this?
Yeah, so into that slight post tilt is going to make your lumbar go into flexion, right? So
I have a tendency towards anterior tilt, so if I bolster to a little out of that, is that going to be a...
you just don't want to make it too great, right? Because then you're going to really challenge. Yeah. I mean, to be in flexion is okay. You know, you just don't want to make it so great that it starts to take away your ability to actually extend.
Okay.
But yes, blocking that essentially is just what people really should do. And any way you can block it without actually hindering the action you're trying to create is a good idea.
So that's what I've been doing when I've been practicing, just these sort of head lifts and just like, can I pull my arms up without anything else moving? I've been bolstering into just what I would guess is probably a little more neutral than my anterior tilt, and that feels better too.
Good.
It feels like I can control it better.
Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, if you do feel, even with that bolster, that your hips are continuously moving, then try your best to fix that position as best you can.
Yeah, I think again, it's just part of this deficit is this glute, this adductor, this part of my abdominal wall, they're all kind of in internal rotation or leftward rotation, and so they're not on tap, and so the bolstering helps me, I think, access some of that.
Yeah. So another thing is, you know, because we focus more so on teaching the body the T-spine motion, right? But the next thing would be, once the T-spine motion is nice and clean or becomes cleaner, then we would say, okay, if this rib cage keeps jutting, you know, during the course of an action where I don't want it to jut, you know, it could be overpowered by a lot of the opposite structures, right? Or maybe those structures are just so tense and so tight that it's just not giving me the room to properly hold that position. In that case, we can pails and rails rotation. So it would require a good sturdy stick or even, you know, a piece of furniture that's not gonna move.
I mean, I've got dowels and stuff.
Good, yeah, and make sure those dowels don't snap, because I've heard some horror stories. But when you're rotating, you know, I oftentimes, you know, in New York, you know, I would be in someone's apartment and I would say, okay, let's use your couch. And the couch is pretty heavy, it's usually up against the wall. So I would tell this person to rotate, and then the leverage is right here. So once they feel this happening, it's like, all right, bear down, bear down, bear down, bear down, use the leverage, and press against that, right? So, developing a cramp just doing that. So once I'm pressing against that, I'm telling all of these tissues to really pull my torso into this full rotation, but it can't go anywhere. So now I'm on stretch,
Yeah.
right? This is a
Okay.
passive stretch.
Yeah.
And then as I'm going in the opposite direction, I'm telling all of these structures to tighten up, which is telling these structures again, loosen up or relax so I can turn this way, right? And then once I've done, you know, my 3 to 5 sets of pails and rails, the next thing would be strengthening it. And there's different ways to do that. If someone has a cable machine, that's one way to go, right? I can go into my flexion, I can rotate until my end range, and this is what we would call a PALS, right? A progressive angular load.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be isometric, it just has to be according to where that progressive or regressive tissue is.
Yeah. So I've been practicing just a little bit of like, you know, again, like just with a really light resistance band because I got like a Swedish ladder and just kind of rolling into this side and breathing for a second, coming out and rolling. And I mean, it's not perfect. My shoulder, I keep having to adjust my shoulder and stuff in my head, but I'm trying to open this and get that back. But yeah, it's slow.
Yeah. Slow is better than no, right? And if the shoulder, because a lot of times, especially when we anchor with our hands, our shoulders are going to be going for the ride, our scapula, we're going to be doing stuff. Sometimes especially if you have a Swedish ladder, which is an amazing tool, I can actually take my bands or whatever I'm using for my resistance, hook it up to the Swedish ladder, place my arms behind, and now I'm rotating.
Oh, and I don't have to have that protraction problem.
Yeah, so the protraction may still want to happen, but it's a little bit easier when it's back here to notice when it happens.
Yeah.
And then the idea is to try and go as far as you can without protracting, and you find that it's a lot less, right? All of a sudden my rotation looks like, holy shit, you know? Yeah, but little by little that sensation becomes stronger, and the knowledge of where I am in space, you know, it becomes refined, you know?
Yeah, well, and I think that's the big thing I'm sort of struggling with is like, you know, what does it feel like to feel like this is open in the back and I can breathe there and I'm not pressed forward, and it's an elusive feeling because automatically it feels really weird. It's like feels like the ribs kind of do this, like they kind of gum up underneath. And it has become such a normal feeling that I get it confused with feeling open. It's like, is that what I want, or is this? Like it gets confusing in my brain. I don't know why, but
well, I mean that's the way it is. It's entropy at its best, and that's the best way to describe it. It's a little confusing.
Yeah.
The thing is, most people have no concept of it at all. So whereas it's confusing for you, people just don't feel it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's an even bigger issue.
Yeah, for sure.
But playing that game constantly is what sharpens that instinct.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I keep telling myself, even though I'm like not on top of it yet. It's like, I'm getting there,
Yeah, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Daily progress.
Yeah.
And they're minuscule wins. And then those wins, I mean, eventually fade and you focus on something harder.
Yeah.
So, T-spine homework is to use your ladder with your arms in a different position, right? Because we know that reaching creates that protraction, and oftentimes T-spine rotation might actually be, or your motion, what you feel as a rotation, might actually be a scapular or even a shoulder action. So trying to remove the shoulders, whether it be back here or whether it be just right in front. I find that this position here oftentimes still has that.
Yeah.
In that case, I would say take the band, strap the band, have another prop, which is your stick or your foam roller that's right against your chest, and actually try to pull your shoulders away from that as you're doing your T-spine stuff. Yeah, so it's just another thing to concentrate on, as if we didn't have enough.
Right. Although I see that I could see where that actually could be very helpful, because I automatically noticed that I was trying to, this pec doesn't want to be there, and now that's a lot more work for me to be there. Yeah. That's a good one.
Anytime the shoulder touches, pull it back, continue into that partial car, right? Whatever you're focusing on. If I go here and I feel my shoulders jet forward, I pull it away, I try to get more flexion with it pulled away, okay, now I've got full flexion. I'm gonna try to keep the shoulder pulled away as I stay in that flexion and rotate. Feel the shoulders come forward, pull them back to center, practice that. Try and beat that, that reaction that continuously happens.
Yeah.
And it's all about patterning in that sense, right?
Right. So, okay. And then, so if I'm successful, let's say I'm kind of, okay, I'm here, I'm in this position that feels like a giant stretch in the back of my ribs on the right side, and I'm trying to get my shoulders back, I can stay here and do the breathing.
Yeah.
And that would sort of open that space up.
Lots of end range options, right? So,
Okay.
I mean, basically whatever you can think of in that sense of end range options, right?
Okay.
It could be, again, just a partial car, right?
Mhm.
It could be, you know what, today I did the partial car, tomorrow I'm gonna load it. I'm gonna get a 1 pound band. I'm gonna attach it to my body or to my foam roller, right? I can actually say, you know what, I'm gonna put this and this here, right? And hook it to your arms, or
Oh, I gotcha.
even hook it like that,
Right,
you know?
so that I
And
have
now,
some-
now do your crunch and your rotation.
Right. Oh, okay. Oh, that's hard.
Yeah, now rotate. Good, so just another way to load, and it doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
heavy band at
Okay,
all.
yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the other thing is I found, I was like, oh yeah, I can do a red band. It's like, oh no. I
Red
can't.
band's a lot to
Yeah.
start with.
I need the light stuff now. Yeah. Okay. Another question I have is with this, whatever, forward shoulder, what that really feels like to me is that I have a really hard time finding external rotation of the humerus in the joint.
Mhm.
So I've been practicing that a lot more as well. But again, it's like it's hard for me to get serratus and lat and all that stuff on. Do you have any like wisdom of getting these on and holding in that spot?
So the shoulder issue, that the way I'm viewing it is the majority of the time when that does go into internal rotation, there's an upward motion of your scapula
Yep.
as well. So
Yep.
that tells me that the depressors in the scapula are at a disadvantage
Yeah.
for one reason or another.
Right.
So practicing depression is one thing, but also controlling that feeling of the subscapularis action.
Mhm.
So subscapularis essentially takes your scapula and keeps it attached to the thoracic cage,
Mhm.
right? And when you have that motion of elevation and upward rotation, the scapula sometimes floats,
Mhm.
right? Some people will display that in winging,
Yeah, I have
and
traditionally had a lot of winging.
other people just look like they have fighter shoulders,
Yeah.
you know, and it looks like it's staying attached, but really subscapularis is just not doing its job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really difficult to single it out without me actually touching it. But one exercise that I've seen that, you ever hear of Eric Cressy?
The name's familiar, but I don't know why.
So he trains baseball players mainly,
Okay.
but he has always been like a scapula guy. Whenever I'm wondering about what possible things could help scapula, he has a lot of information.
Okay.
But one exercise, what's the best place to utilize this? I think this space, actually, maybe coming and framing this picture. And ideally your wall wouldn't be this texture.
Yeah, I know.
Because
You want to
we
do it on the
show
mirror?
how-
The
Yeah.
mirrors. Okay.
So what I want to do is I want to aim my tailbone out. I want to lower my rib cage down. And this gives me just a little bit of flexion here.
Yep.
My elbows try to come in toward my body and also trying to stay as close to the wall as I can as I complete this action. And what I want to do is first apply pressure to the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to keep that pressure on the wall as I go all the way out into a Y.
Okay.
Once I'm out in the Y, I make sure that my rib cage is still down. I pressurize the wall again and bring that pressure right back down to my start position. So what this is doing is, number one, it's creating a serratus action, but it's creating a serratus action with an external rotation bias because my elbows are trying to stay in,
Okay.
right? And my pressure is also activating subscapularis to keep the scapula attached,
Right.
but it's allowing the scapula to rotate the way that they would,
Right.
right?
Okay.
One thing that usually happens is I'll see people raise up.
Yeah.
And the idea is to try to keep the shoulders in the down position or softly reaching away from the ears.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're trying to train that scapula, number one, to stay down toward the pockets and still have that upward rotation. Because what's happening is we get elevation and then this forward rotation.
That's exactly what's happening.
Right?
I can see it and feel it, but it's like it's like this state of confusion. My body's like, well, wait, how do we get there? And sometimes I can find it, but then I'll realize that I've actually like yanked it without lowering it, and it feels.
It's tricky.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's definitely tricky. So that exercise obviously is outside of FRC zone.
Sure.
But you know,
I could breathe there.
You absolutely
do the maximal breathing. And,
you absolutely can. And in this position, if I'm doing maximal expansive breath, number one, I'm trying to feel my palms pressurize the wall. Number two, I'm trying not to let my elbow pits go toward the wall.
Yep.
I'm trying to get them behind me as much as I can. And obviously, we all have different forms of external rotation that are capable, or different capabilities in that external rotation. But your elbow pit should be trying to go behind you, while your elbows try to go toward the wall. And as I'm breathing, remember that even though my tailbone is back, I don't want this arch.
Right, I want the ribs to feel like they're trying to come down.
That's going to increase pressure against the wall, and you might actually feel some tetanization happen. Make sure that this shoulder girdle is not reaching toward the sky.
Yeah.
So the wall would be your first point of reference, or on the scale of undulation.
Yeah.
The floor could be another point, which is going to be a little more difficult because now you have body weight.
Right, gravity.
Toward the ground.
Yeah.
I would say putting blocks underneath you is going to be another way to make that position easier without losing its benefit. Because I don't want to completely take away my stimulus.
Right.
But with this one, I can go tailbone up. I can start here. Deep breath in, exhale and bear down. And I can press into the ground. Elbows come all the way toward my body. Press into the ground as I go back into my Y.
Yeah.
And remember that feeling of pressing into the ground. Number one, this is probably better done on wood floors because they're very slidey.
Yeah.
So the less friction, the better.
Yeah, we've got a good slidey floor.
And always trying to turn that elbow toward the ground as you're moving. That's like the really hard part.
Yeah, and that's that feeling of like really deep in the armpit.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I can manage that. All right, cool.
Sweet. So let's go into, so you got that recorded. Let's go into the foot stuff.
Okay.
If you don't mind taking your socks off for me.
Yep. Yeah, I've been doing this little webinar thing with Gait Happens and Lauren O'Hayan, and they were talking about some studies showing a lot of inability to use your toes relative to
pelvic floor
dysfunction in the
stuff.
pelvic floor.
Yeah.
So super interesting stuff.
Yep.
So you want me standing or
right now we can be in this seated position.
Okay.
But we're gonna go toe by toe, and
Okay.
I'm actually gonna provide the stimulus here.
Okay.
So I want you to lift up all your toes. Good. I'm gonna place my fingertip underneath, drop the other toes. Good. So now, as I raise up, I want you to provide pressure into my finger. Don't worry about hurting me. Good, now go away from me without lifting the other toes. Good, keep those guys down. Good, go into me. And away from me. That's showing a good amount of strength going into flexion. Keep that down.
Oh, they're so confused. Oops, okay. Reset.
Good. Now place that one down. Now go against me. No, not these guys. Just this guy here. Oh, drop this guy down. Make sure you feel the floor there. And try and lift this up against my fingertip.
I cannot keep that one down and take that one go.
Good. So with a bit of force, this guy definitely displays a lot more strength in the opposite direction of extension. But as you can see, there's some entropy going on here as well, right? And that entropy could be indicative of, again, going up the kinetic chain and giving confusing information to the rest of the body. So what I would do is, with the foot homework, is again start with just your cars, and then once you've got about, I want to say 4 to 5 repetitions of your cars going, you'll be primed up and use a band, right? So the band goes underneath here. You can place, or a rubber band if you will, you can place your finger next to it and just going with, keeping those other guys from lifting off, and then pressing down, right?
I definitely have tons of bands like that. But so is it okay to start by nailing that one to the floor until I can manage?
It's okay to start that way, but it definitely should progress to trying to keep it down. Another way that I've done it with clients is I'll take the blocks and make a T. Heel will be over here. The rubber band is right around this block. I should have brought a rubber band with me.
Okay.
So T, the heel goes this way, the toes are going this way. The rubber band is actually going to be around the block, right? Your toes, the free toes that we're not trying to exercise yet, are against the rubber band.
They're
and
pushing
the big
down
toe
on top of it.
And the big toe's trying to push against it upward,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, obviously, with the other toes that don't have as much strength, you can do the very same thing. The only thing is you're trying to use a thinner rubber band to lighten the load. You don't want to give it the same amount.
Right.
But yeah, and then vice versa. So if you want to press down with the big toe and then lift up with the middle toe, right, against that band.
Do you find that people can learn to separate like these two toes?
Those are the hardest.
Okay, yeah, because I always give myself the excuse that they have their own little peninsula here, so they just always move together.
Well, when you look at the fascia too, it's like there's a very strong attachment between those two. But I do see people very well controlling those specific toes. So it's not outside of the scope of possibility.
Yeah.
But it just takes a lot of practice.
I've worked on it intermittently, but...
I mean, I still have a problem doing these 2 fingers. There was an issue one time when I was a kid. I used to fight a lot. And I got a tooth stuck in my knuckle.
Ooh.
And from that point, I found that I could not separate the action. So I don't know if it was just like, me repeating a certain action that, that unified those 2 things.
Right.
But for a while, I could not lift up my middle finger without this guy coming along with me and vice versa. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different things that contribute to how our bodies decide to formulate their movement.
Yeah.
But the ability to separate the tissues is there.
Yeah, okay.
It just takes practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I can do that. I like doing the toe and foot stuff. It's always entertaining.
So another thing that I like to do also is to have both blocks. Again, you can use, for me, my feet are always just a little bit longer than the block, and if that's the case for you, you can always use that T method.
Right.
But I'll have both blocks here, and I'll have the rubber band around my big toes and kind of do a cliffhanger.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so I try to keep these guys all the way up, and then I try to buckle the big toe. And for me, this has been key to freeing up motion at my big toe, which this guy here used to press me
Yeah,
over.
I was gonna say, you got pretty good bunion action going there.
Huge. But if you look at my before pictures, this guy was well into this second position. So for me, better is better.
Oh yeah,
right?
for sure.
And now it's like, now I can actually, when I sit down, I can actually feel some sort of space happening. Whereas before, this guy, anytime I would press down, would push this floor, push this one to the floor.
Yeah, when I wear my, I actually, both toes were already buckling these 2 toes when I started my work with Katie. And they're way, way better, but I was wearing my toes separators earlier this week, and I was noticing this one keeps the space fine. This one eventually will squish the spacer up still.
Yeah, and I mean, the toe spacers are priceless for that reason too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just another way for us to get the information that we need without actually having to think about it.
Right.
And, you know, time. Right? So I've been wearing my toe spacers for, I don't know, 4 years now. And if I wasn't, I probably would need surgery.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can tell by the degree of my bunion right here, like,
Right.
imagine that being 2 to 3 millimeters larger.
Right.
And the inability to raise or lower my toe without actually
Right.
feeling like the knuckles on my other toes are going to break,
Yeah.
which is rough, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, it's actually, you have a ton of more movement than I would expect.
And now it actually feels like my toe is actually straighter on than it ever was. Yeah, I gotta bring in, because I made like a little posterized picture of my feet. Which
Oh, before
look
and after?
horrible.
Nice.
Yes, but it's a constant reminder for me, you know.
Yeah, how far that you can take
how
your
far
tissue. Yeah.
well, and how much regression I can experience if I don't keep up with what I'm doing, right? Whereas I have friends who have very similar feet to mine, and they're going into surgery, and surgery doesn't always work out very well for people.
I have neighbors across the street who they're about a decade younger than me, so late 40s, and he just had his bunion surgery the other day, and I very gently suggested there might be alternatives before, and he was like, oh yeah, I've maxed out, you know, physical therapy and this and that, and nothing worked, and I'm gonna have the surgery. And it's like, okay, and I was talking to his wife, and she's like, oh yeah, he's got the second one planned for like June, and I'm like, everybody I know who had one done stops at one, because it's not a fun recovery.
Yeah. And I mean, if there's a recovery at all. I'm seeing someone here on Monday who had the surgery when she was 17, and she's now, I think, 25, and still having reoccurring issues
No doubt.
with the feet.
Yeah. No doubt.
Which brings me to the short foot technique.
I know short foot.
Yeah, let's see it.
My short foot used to be nothing, and now I can do something.
Cool.
So yeah, this is actually one I do practice a fair amount. And,
Sweet.
I love this. And it's funny because this just came up. I just read a study this morning in preparation for the second of the 4-part series of the Floored Core, and they were saying that this is one of the best intrinsic, extrinsic foot muscle exercises.
Yeah.
But there is.
Try to get these two involved as well. Yep, exactly. So one thing that helped me to make this feel better and actually make things happen, because I had a big pronation of the foot, which, you know, my doctor was like, you have flat feet. You will always have flat feet. And if you look at my arch now,
Oh yeah, you have an arch.
they pop.
Yeah.
You know, and I can actually be on the balls of my feet, whereas before that felt impossible.
Yeah.
But what I did was I started to utilize towels. And a good place to start would be a paper towel. So let's do one foot at a time. Now imagine, go ahead and set that foot down. Imagine that you're trying to draw the entire paper towel to the center of your foot using all of your toes as you're doing short foot. Good. Now go into full extension of all the toes and drop it down, gently pressing into the ground, short foot again. Good,
So
but try
full
not,
short foot, or,
but
okay.
try not to knuckle
Just.
up. Try not to knuckle up, just the arch. Good, once you got the arch, then you can grab the towel. Yep, then extend. Good, drop it. Good, short foot up, and then you can knuckle up. Yep, feel the short foot happen first to draw in the towel. Yep, and then knuckle up. And fully extend. Over and over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah, and at first my towels were
Here's so I can
going
make sure I
nowhere.
can see it. Yeah. So I can't actually get it to stay under me, but at least I can get it to move. Okay, so short foot.
Yep, make sure that all those toes are involved in drawing in the pieces of towel, and then you can knuckle up. Yep, but when you knuckle up, try to feel like all those toes are trying to come underneath your foot, and then totally extend all of the toes, let the ball touch down, let the toes really reach, and short foot again. Good, always feel the arch pop with the short foot first, and then you can knuckle up, and then extend fully. Yep. Try to feel every single toe, even the pinky toe tries to extend as much into extension as it possibly can. Yep. Good. With your short foot, try to feel every single digit gently touch the ground, and don't let it lift off as you short foot.
So keep the toes sort of reaching.
Yep, so all the knuckles should be straight as you start your short foot, and these guys should be touching down as best you can. Once you feel that arch pop in that short foot as best you can, then you can lift off, or knuckle up to scrunch it, then lift off, gently place, short foot again. Feel the arch pop before any other action happens, then you can knuckle up and extend. Let the ball touch, place all the digits, short foot. Once that short foot happens, then you can knuckle up. And again.
Okay.
Yeah. So always making sure those steps happen first, that short foot without knuckling up.
Yeah, I
Right,
think I
I
have a
wanna-
tendency to try to lift for some reason the middle toes when I do it, but
Yeah, and that towel can give those digits some sort of sensation underneath as well. As soon as you feel like, oh, I don't feel that towel underneath those two digits, just take the time to gently touch down and try and feel those toes in action as you pull that short foot in. Sometimes too, and this is something that I saw in myself as well as other clients, sometimes whether it be these guys or whether it be all the toes in general, the tension at the top of the foot, sometimes it needs some manual massage, right? So this would be the downward kind of massage motion
right.
that adds to, you know, the relief in tension of extension. Because sometimes, you know, in our gait patterns, we're so used to trying to lift with these toes and we don't get enough of that flexion that the tissues, just like anything else, become fixed in that wired kind of
Right.
position of lifting. And sometimes,
Yeah, so this is, one of Katie's, this is one of our favorite foot things, is
Yeah.
top of foot stretch. So I do
Yeah.
this one too, but
so the top of the foot stretch is the opening action. The next thing would be full knuckling up and really just focusing on pails and rails of the toes.
oh wow, pails and rails of the toes.
Yeah.
Ooh-wee, I bet
So-
that's fun.
For extension. And I've gone through countless cramps
Yeah, I bet.
and it is like the worst. But when those toes finally start to flex, it feels so much better in the foot. And then all of those intrinsic tissues feel so much freer and stronger to
Yeah.
express themselves.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't actually done this in a while, so I can feel a deep, deep stretch in there.
Yeah.
Okay, I can
So
see your
pails
wife
and
here,
rails.
so-
Oh yeah, she's got to go back to work.
All right. Well, I shouldn't keep you, but that was awesome, and I'm so glad that you suggested that I get this
Yeah.
and